I remember my first visit here viscerally, and stepping back into the garden again today, I was taken right back to my first visit here just over a year ago on May 9th, 2022. And that was, as we know, really the height of the people's protest in Sri Lanka, the Aragalaya. And I remember, the feeling that I had when I stepped onto the plane, not knowing really what I was walking into. And we had spoken that evening, and it was very, very late for you because of the time difference. But we really were going back and forth about whether whether I should come or not. And of course, the trust told me that you supported me in whatever decision I made. And I remember asking you, what about you? What is the stance of the trust in this moment? And you said something that will stay with me forever. You said that it is precisely at times like this that we have to go to work, and that we see and understand the power of culture in people's lives and the importance of culture in people's lives. And I said, well, that's it then, I'm coming. And I remember being very scared, but really feeling that, this is the right, if any time to go somewhere, this is the right moment. And if this can be a part of the story of the work that we're doing together, then it is meant to be, and it's aligned that way for a reason. And I remember when we came to Lunuganga on that trip, and of course it was very different to coming today. Really, today I saw on our route the hustle and bustle of Colombo, and then the hustle and bustle of all the villages and the places that we passed by on our way. Stark contrast to last year, when everything was essentially shut down and it was extremely quiet. But somehow the feeling of arriving at Lunuganga, regardless of the journey, is the same. It's this place of constance, and this place of quietness, this place of reflection. Really, one has, I think, walking into it, an instant and immediate sense of a deep reflection, and of a place that's really drawing us closer to, to listen inside, and to connect with what is inside, both cosmic and microbial, so to speak. If we think about this as a place of the cosmos, that it reflects that on the smallest scale and on the largest scale. And it was very pertinent with everything going on and all the discussions that we'd had the day prior. Coming here, being able to reflect on what was happening in Sri Lanka at the time, being able to speak with yourself and Channa about the politics of the country and the journey that it had taken the people to arrive to this moment. Being able to talk about it here in this garden felt particularly special, and somehow it also felt very, very pertinent. So I think that every time I come back here now, I'll still be struck with that sense of the importance of places like this, that they really, really hold a very important space for us to be able to reflect, to have spaces of escape, to have spaces of imagination that we can turn to in moments of crisis, I think is incredibly important. So I am from Johannesburg. I was born and bred and raised and studied in South Africa. And I grew up in a time in South Africa that was filled with optimism. So I was born 5 days after Mandela was released from prison. And that time in South Africa it was really a jubilant time. It was the time of the Rainbow Nation. Apartheid was really at its end and really, crumbling and falling. I was 4 years old when we became a democracy, when Mandela was inaugurated as president. And my childhood is filled with memories and the sense of optimism and that sense of possibility. And on the one hand, I really think that sense of hope and being almost a born free, not quite, but almost, really shaped my practice in terms of wanting to be a part of a project that is about social change, having an awareness of being part of a generation that is working towards building something different, and understanding the importance of architecture. And on the one hand, in South Africa, I think I really understood and saw viscerally that architecture was employed so much to segregate us. It was really complicit in othering and separating people. It affirmed our place in the world. It told us, where we stood in the social hierarchy very clearly, because your surroundings tell you something about what you deserve. But because you can see that, one then also has to understand that architecture can also be a force for the opposite. It can be a force and an agent to bring people together, to allow us to gather. Despite seeming differences, it is a platform for commonality and a platform to be able to express and share these commonalities and differences. And so that is something that's threaded through my practice, but something that I was really reminded of when I first visited Sri Lanka, in this moment at the height of the public protest, is also how much that is a part of my history. And when I was in architecture school, I studied at a time when I really felt that, the vibrancy, the energy, the sense of optimism that I describe so often about Johannesburg, that its people, its rituals, its life is made on top of, inside of, above, and despite people being so excluded from the city's fabric, that somehow we really have a city that completely comes to life in so many different ways. And these ways are really methods and forms for architecture. And I was talking about my studies. I studied at this time where I felt incredibly frustrated with the canon and the curriculum, and I remember feeling very deeply that I wanted to be able to see Johannesburg articulated in architecture and both the profession and the canon. And I'm reminded that at this time in Sri Lanka, when the public protest was on, that we also had of course, we have a history of protest that really changed and shaped our country. But when I graduated from architecture school, it was the time when the Roads Must Fall and subsequently the Fees Must Fall movement started and then spread across the world. A time when students were really saying we need free decolonized education and we need it now. Although things have changed, they have not changed enough, and we really need systemic change. We don't just need surface level change. And I believe that that is also something that has rooted my practice, this desire to find design form and expression that is coming from our contexts and our conditions. And that is how Counterspace was born, really with this intent and desire to find design form and design expression for Johannesburg. I then started to say for Johannesburg and the continent, but now I think I'm really interested in diasporas and in how hybrid our identities are and how that can be expressed as a point of resonance across culture. My own identity is incredibly hyphenated. I am South African of Indian heritage. I'm also Muslim, and I now live between London and Johannesburg, and most recently Jeddah. And of course, Geoffrey Bauer was also someone in his heritage and in his being that embodied so much cosmopolitanism and so much hybridity. And I think that was really expressed in his way of being and in his architecture. I think we can really, really see the coming together of many different worlds, many different worldviews, and many different ways of being. And for me, that is so powerful because it really shows us that architecture can be a force that brings people together, that cements different facets of identities and puts them in the same frame so that everybody has a point of connection. So I'm very, very excited about the project that we're embarking on because I hope that I'm able to really honor the ethos of Geoffrey Bauer through these ideals and in this way, and express something about what this place is, and also the identities that it's going to hold in the form of these traveling sculptures, in the form of this literature that will hopefully be in many different languages. I think beauty is really the ultimate form of social justice for me. I think, especially being South African, we were often told and we often understood that projects of social justice are related to service delivery. And of course they are. The provision of housing and infrastructure is incredibly important. But I think that if we are providing only in the forms that are inherited to us, then we're doing a disservice somewhere. And I think too often the project of beauty is seen as a luxury, when actually the ways that we express ourselves, what could be more political than that? And what is more important than that also, in terms of shaping and forming our identities. And if we think back to the earliest architectures, they were really about forms of honoring, and they were connected to ritual practice, they were connected to religious underpinnings and understandings, or let's say mythical underpinnings and understandings of our connections with the cosmos. Many of the first structures were related to burial. And we imagine that architecture is such a pragmatic project, that it is only about survival, or that it is first about survival. But we need to understand that being able to express who we are is also a part of that survival and a part of that evolution. And I genuinely believe that there is nothing more political than beauty. And in fact, if we think about the project of colonization, the project of apartheid, so much of it was about being able to erase and stamp out particular identities and intelligences that came from other places, and to project a very specific form and set of identities onto a place. So I think if we can see that again, then I really think we have to understand that the project of beauty is also an important project of politics.